The blood trickled down Vivian Jensen's face as she staggered backward, her hand clutching her swollen cheek where Samuel Thornton had struck her for the third time. The gathering crowd in Cottonwood Springs stood frozen in the dusty main street, watching as the wealthy cattle baron loomed over the defiant schoolteacher. "You'll be my wife, Miss Jensen, whether you like it or not," Samuel growled, his knuckles white around his walking stick. No woman refuses Samuel Thornton, especially not some penniless teacher who ought to be grateful for the offer. Vivian's vision blurred with tears of pain and rage, but she straightened her spine and looked him directly in the eyes. "I would rather die than marry a man who believes beating a woman is the way to win her heart." Samuel's face contorted with fury as he raised his hand again. "Then perhaps I should teach you another lesson about respecting your betters." The crack of a pistol being cocked split the air. "Touch her again and it'll be the last thing you ever do." The voice was low and steady, cutting through the tension like a knife. The crowd parted as a tall figure stepped forward, revolver trained unflinchingly on Samuel's chest. Lucas Ingram's blue eyes were cold as winter beneath the shadow of his worn Stetson, his weathered face set in hard lines as he positioned himself between Vivian and her attacker. Samuel's hand froze mid-air. "This doesn't concern you, Ingram." "It does now." Lucas never lowered his gun as he spoke, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent street. "Miss Jensen has made her feelings clear, and now I'm making mine clear. She's under my protection." "Protection?" Samuel spat. "On what grounds?" Lucas's gaze never wavered. "As my wife." Vivian's head snapped up, her eyes widening in shock as she stared at the back of the cowboy she barely knew beyond passing greetings. The man who delivered mail and supplies to her schoolhouse occasionally. The quiet, solitary rancher who lived on the outskirts of town. Your wife. Samuel laughed, though the sound held no humor. "This is the first I'm hearing of such an arrangement. We've been keeping it private," Lucas replied without hesitation, "but I won't stand by while you assault my woman in the middle of town." He glanced briefly at Vivian, a silent question in his eyes. Vivian understood immediately. This was a way out, dangerous perhaps, but better than facing Samuel's wrath alone. She stepped forward on shaky legs, moving to Lucas's side. "It's true," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I belong to Lucas Ingram." The year was 1876, and in Cottonwood Springs, Wyoming territory, a woman alone had few protections, but a married woman that was different. Even Samuel Thornton wouldn't openly challenge another man's claim to his wife, not without risking his own standing in the community. Samuel's eyes darted between them, searching for the lie. "If you're married, where's your ring? Where was the ceremony? Who witnessed it?" "Not that it's any of your business," Lucas replied coolly, "but we were married by Preacher Williams 2 towns over. As for witnesses, we kept it simple, just us and God." He holstered his weapon slowly, deliberately, but his posture remained ready. "Now I suggest you move along, Thornton, before I forget my manners entirely." The crowd watched, breaths held as the two men stared each other down. Samuel finally took a step back, adjusting his vest with affected nonchalance. "This isn't over, Ingram. For today it is." Lucas placed a gentle hand on Vivian's back. "Come along, Mrs. Ingram, let's get you home." Vivian allowed herself to be guided away, acutely aware of the stares following them as they walked down the street. Her heart hammered against her ribs from fear, from pain, from the sheer audacity of what had just transpired. This stranger had just claimed her as his wife, and she had confirmed it. Only when they were far enough away from prying ears did she speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Ingram, I don't know how to thank you, but not here," he interrupted softly. "We're still being watched. My wagon's just ahead. Can you make it that far?" Vivian nodded, though her legs trembled beneath her skirts. The left side of her face throbbed where Samuel had struck her, and she could taste blood from her split lip. Lucas helped her into his wagon with surprising gentleness, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. As they pulled away from town, Vivian stole a glance at her unexpected savior. His profile was sharp against the afternoon sun's strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble, straight nose, and those remarkable blue eyes focused intently on the road ahead. "Where are we going?" she finally asked when the town had shrunk to a distant cluster of buildings behind them. "My ranch," Lucas replied without looking at her. "It's about 4 miles out. You'll be safe there while we figure this out." "Figure what out exactly? Mr. Ingram, I appreciate your intervention, but I cannot continue this charade." Now he did look at her, his expression softening slightly. "Miss Jensen, Samuel Thornton isn't a man who forgets slights. He's the most powerful man in 3 counties. If you go back to town unmarried, he'll come for you again, and next time I might not be around to stop him." Vivian fell silent, the reality of her situation sinking in like a stone in water. She was 22 years old, had come west just 6 months ago to take the teaching position. She had no family here, no real connections beyond her students and their parents. Samuel had been pursuing her almost from the moment she'd arrived, his advances growing increasingly aggressive when she'd rebuffed him. "So what do you suggest?" she asked finally. "That we actually marry? I don't even know you, Mr. Ingram." "Lucas," he corrected quietly. "And no, I'm not suggesting we truly marry. Just that we maintain the appearance until Thornton loses interest or until you can safely leave Cottonwood Springs." Vivian touched her swollen cheek gingerly. "And if he doesn't lose interest, if he discovers our deception," Lucas's jaw tightened. "Then I'll deal with that when it comes." They traveled the rest of the way in silence, Vivian lost in her thoughts as she watched the landscape change from town to rolling prairie dotted with sagebrush. Eventually, a modest but well-maintained ranch came into view, a sturdy log cabin, a barn, corral, and several outbuildings. It wasn't grand like the Thornton estate, but there was a peaceful quality to it that immediately drew Vivian in. As Lucas helped her down from the wagon, a dog came bounding around the corner of the house, a large, rangy mutt with one ear standing straight up and the other flopped over. He skidded to a halt at the sight of Vivian, head tilted curiously. "That's Ranger," Lucas said, a hint of warmth entering his voice for the first time. "He's friendly, just surprised to see someone new." Vivian extended her hand to the dog, who sniffed it carefully before giving it a tentative lick. Despite everything, she smiled. "Hello, Ranger." Lucas led her into the cabin, holding the door open as she stepped inside. The interior was simple but tidy, a main room with a stone fireplace, wooden table with 4 chairs, a small kitchen area, and a few pieces of sturdy furniture. 2 closed doors presumably led to bedrooms. "It's not much," Lucas said, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. "But it's mine. It's lovely," Vivian replied honestly. She had been staying in a small room above the general store since arriving in Cottonwood Springs, and this cabin felt more like a real home than anything she'd experienced in months. Lucas gestured to one of the chairs. "Sit. Let me get something for your face." Vivian obeyed, watching as he moved efficiently around the cabin, retrieving a basin of water, clean cloths, and a small jar of what appeared to be salve. Up close, without the distraction of immediate danger, she could study him more carefully. He was perhaps 30, with dark brown hair that curled slightly at the ends, and fine lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he spent most of his time outdoors. His hands were calloused but clean, and though he moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to physical labor, there was nothing crude about him. He knelt before her chair and dipped a cloth in the cool water. "This might sting," he warned before gently pressing it to her split lip. Vivian winced but held still. "You seem practiced at this, Mr. Ingram." "Lucas," he reminded her again, "and I've patched up my share of injuries. Ranching isn't always gentle work." He cleaned the blood from her face with careful movements, his expression grave as he examined the bruising. "He hit you hard?" "Yes," she said simply, unsure what else to add. Lucas applied the salve to her cheek and lip with surprisingly delicate touches. "The swelling should go down by morning, but the bruising will take longer. You're lucky he didn't break anything." "Lucky," Vivian repeated, a bitter edge to her voice. "Is that what I am?" Lucas sat back on his heels, regarding her steadily. "You're alive and away from him, so yes, I'd say that's a kind of luck." She couldn't argue with that logic. Thank you for interfering, most men wouldn't have. Most men should be ashamed of themselves then. He rose to his feet, returning the supplies to their places. Are you hungry? I can make something. The question caught Vivian off guard. In the chaos of the day, she hadn't considered such mundane necessities as food. I suppose I am, actually. Lucas nodded and moved to the kitchen area, retrieving ingredients with the same quiet efficiency he'd shown with the medical supplies. I can offer stew and biscuits, nothing fancy. That sounds wonderful. Vivian watched him work, trying to reconcile this gentle, domestic man with the hard-eyed cowboy who had drawn his gun on Samuel Thornton without hesitation. Mr. Ingram, Lucas, may I ask why you did it? Why you stepped in? His hands paused briefly over the pot he was preparing. No decent man stands by while a woman is beaten in the street, but claiming me as your wife, that goes beyond simple decency. Lucas was quiet for a long moment, his back to her as he worked. Thornton respects nothing but power and possession, he finally said. Telling him to leave you alone wouldn't have worked, but challenging his right to claim you by asserting my own claim. He shrugged. It was the only thing I could think of in the moment that might actually stop him. Vivian digested this. You don't know me, I could be trouble. Now he did turn, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Miss Jensen, I knew you were trouble the day you arrived in town and told old Judge Peterson that women deserved the right to vote just as much as men. Half the town was scandalized. A flush crept up Vivian's neck. You heard about that? It was the talk of the saloon for days. His expression grew serious again. I respect a person who stands by their convictions, even when it's not convenient. Something in his tone made Vivian wonder if there was more to his story than he was letting on, but before she could pursue it, Lucas continued. We need to discuss practical matters. The town believes we're married now. If you return to your room above the store, people will talk and Thornton will know we lied. Vivian's stomach tightened. So you're suggesting I stay here, unchaperoned, as my wife, yes. He must have seen the alarm in her expression because he quickly added, I'll take the barn. You can have the house to yourself. I couldn't put you out of your own home. It's no hardship. I've slept in worse places. He turned back to the stew. But we need to make this convincing. Tomorrow we should go into town together. Let people see us as a couple. Collect your things from your room. The reality of what they were undertaking began to sink in more deeply. My students, you can still teach. Nothing has to change except where you sleep and the story we tell. Vivian stood and paced the small room, her mind racing. This is madness. We're talking about deceiving an entire town. We're talking about keeping you safe, Lucas countered. Unless you have a better solution, she didn't, and they both knew it. Returning to town unmarried would put her right back in Samuel's path. Leaving Cottonwood Springs altogether meant abandoning her students, her purpose, and admitting defeat. How long? She asked finally. How long do we maintain this charade? Lucas stirred the pot slowly. Until Thornton loses interest or moves on. Or until you decide you want to leave Cottonwood Springs. And if neither of those things happens, he looked at her directly then, his blue eyes serious. Then we'll face that when it comes, one day at a time, Miss Jensen. If I'm to be your wife, even in name only, perhaps you should call me Vivian, she suggested, attempting a smile despite her split lip. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Vivian, then. They ate dinner together as twilight settled over the ranch, an oddly domestic scene given the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together. Lucas proved to be a surprisingly good cook, and despite her anxiety, Vivian found herself finishing her entire bowl of stew. Their conversation over the meal was cautious but civil, both of them carefully avoiding any topics too personal or provocative. Instead, Lucas told her about the ranch, his small herd of cattle, the 2 horses he kept besides the ones that pulled his wagon, the vegetable garden out back that provided much of his food. How long have you lived here? Vivian asked as she helped clear the dishes. 7 years. Lucas pumped water into the basin for washing up. Came west after the war, worked on other men's ranches until I saved enough to buy this place. You fought in the war. She couldn't help but be curious about this man who had so suddenly become central to her life. A shadow crossed his face. Union cavalry, but that's a long time ago now. His tone made it clear he didn't wish to elaborate, and Vivian respected the boundary. They finished cleaning up in companionable silence. "I'll show you where you'll sleep," Lucas said when they'd finished, lighting a lamp and leading her to one of the doors off the main room. The bedroom was small but neat, with a sturdy bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a chest of drawers, and a small table with a mirror above it. A window looked out toward the distant mountains, now just dark shapes against the night sky. "This is your room," Vivian realized, noting the few personal items: a book on the bedside table, a brush on the chest of drawers. "It's yours now." Lucas set the lamp down. "The chest should have enough empty drawers for your things when we collect them tomorrow. There's a washroom through that door. It's primitive, but there's a pump inside so you don't have to go out for water." Vivian turned to him, suddenly overwhelmed by his kindness. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you for this." Lucas shook his head. "There's nothing to repay. I couldn't have done differently and lived with myself." He stepped back toward the door. "I'll get some things and head to the barn. Lock the door behind me if it makes you feel safer." "I'm not afraid of you," Vivian said, realizing as she spoke that it was true. Despite having just met him, despite the extraordinary situation, she felt no fear of Lucas Ingram. He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes. "Good night, Vivian." "Good night, Lucas." After he left, Vivian sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process everything that had happened. In the space of a few hours, her entire life had changed course. She was now, for all intents and purposes, Mrs. Lucas Ingram, at least in the eyes of Cottonwood Springs. She touched her bruised cheek gently, wincing at the tenderness. Samuel Thornton's face floated before her mind's eye, contorted with rage and entitlement. The memory of his hand striking her made her shudder. Whatever complications this arrangement with Lucas might bring, it was infinitely preferable to the alternative. Exhausted by the day's events, Vivian didn't bother undressing beyond removing her shoes and outer layers. She slipped beneath the quilt, breathing in the unfamiliar scent of the man who had become her unexpected protector, and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Morning came with the sound of movement outside, the low murmur of Lucas's voice as he spoke to his animals, the clatter of feed buckets, the distant lowing of cattle. Vivian rose, her body aching from yesterday's assault, and made her way to the small washroom. The mirror revealed what she had expected. Her left cheek was purple and swollen, her lips split but beginning to heal. She washed as best she could and pinned her dark hair into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Lucas already in the cabin, frying bacon and eggs on the cook stove. He looked up at her entrance, his eyes immediately going to her injuries. "How do you feel?" "Sore, but better." Vivian adjusted her shawl self-consciously. "I'm afraid I slept in these clothes. I didn't think to bring anything with me. We'll remedy that today." He slid the food onto 2 plates. "I thought we could ride into town after breakfast, get your things. Best to face the gossip head-on." Vivian's stomach tightened at the thought of facing the townspeople, but she nodded. "Yes, I suppose that's wise." They ate breakfast quickly, and Lucas gave her privacy to wash up again before they departed. He hitched his horses to the wagon, then helped her up onto the seat beside him. As they set off toward town, Vivian's anxiety grew with each mile. "What if they don't believe us?" she asked suddenly. "What if someone knows you weren't in Preacher Williams's town recently?" Lucas kept his eyes on the road. "People believe what they want to believe. Half the town already thinks I'm mysterious because I keep to myself. They'll accept that I took a quiet bride. And the other half," now he did glance at her, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "The other half will be too busy speculating on why the new schoolteacher married the reclusive rancher to worry about the details." Despite her nerves, Vivian felt a smile tug at her lips. "You make it sound almost entertaining." "It might be if we weren't playing for such high stakes." His expression sobered. "Stay close to me in town. Thornton isn't likely to approach us directly, but his influence reaches far." Cottonwood Springs looked different to Vivian as they drove down the main street. Every window, Every doorway now seemed to hold watching eyes. Lucas pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the general store, then came around to help her down. His hand remained at the small of her back as they entered the building, a silent statement of possession that wasn't lost on the customers inside. Mrs. Whitaker, the storekeeper's wife, nearly dropped the tin of coffee she was measuring when she saw them. Miss Jensen, Mr. Ingram, or should I say Mr. and Mrs. Ingram now, Vivian forced a smile despite her split lip. Yes, Mrs. Whitaker, it seems our secret is out. Secret indeed, the older woman bustled over, her eyes wide with curiosity. The whole town's talking about it, and after such drama with Mr. Thornton, too. Her gaze fixed on Vivian's bruised face, not bothering to hide her fascination. Such a terrible business. Lucas's hand pressed more firmly against Vivian's back. We've come to collect my wife's belongings from her room, Mrs. Whitaker. Of course, of course. The woman fumbled with the key to the rooms above the store, though I must say it's quite the surprise. No one even knew you two were acquainted, let alone courting. We preferred privacy, Lucas said simply, taking the key from her outstretched hand. As they climbed the stairs to Vivian's small room, the whispers below grew louder. Vivian's cheeks burned with embarrassment, but Lucas remained impassive, opening her door and following her inside. Once they were alone, Vivian let out a shaky breath. That was excruciating. The first time is the worst, Lucas said, moving to help her gather her belongings. Each time will get easier. Her room was sparsely furnished, and she didn't own much: some clothes, a few books, letters from her parents back east, teaching materials. They worked together in efficient silence, packing everything into her trunk and a carpet bag. Is there anything else you need from town while we're here? Lucas asked as he closed the trunk. Vivian thought for a moment. I should stop by the schoolhouse, make sure everything is in order for Monday, he nodded. We can do that next. As they carried her belongings down to the wagon, they encountered more curious stares and whispered comments. Lucas ignored them all, maintaining his calm, slightly distant demeanor. Only when they were back in the wagon did Vivian notice the tension in his jaw. You're not comfortable with all this attention either, she observed quietly. Lucas flicked the reins, setting the horses in motion. I prefer being left alone, but it can't be helped now. The schoolhouse sat at the edge of town, a simple one-room building with rows of desks facing a larger teacher's desk at the front. Vivian felt a wave of relief as they entered the familiar space here. At least, she knew her role with certainty. She moved around the room, checking that everything was in its place, while Lucas stood by the door, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You love teaching, he said. It wasn't a question. Vivian looked up from arranging books on a shelf. I do. It gives me purpose. She ran her hand along the edge of a desk. These children deserve a good education, especially out here where opportunities are limited. That's why you came west, to teach frontier children, she nodded. That and, she hesitated, unsure how much to reveal, I wanted independence. A life that was my own, understanding flickered in Lucas's eyes. And now you find yourself tied to a husband you didn't choose. A pretend husband, Vivian corrected gently, and one who saved me from a far worse fate. She straightened a row of slates. Besides, you didn't choose this either. Before Lucas could respond, the schoolhouse door swung open. Vivian's heart lurched as Samuel Thornton filled the doorway, his imposing figure blocking the light from outside. Two of his ranch hands flanked him, their hands resting casually near their holstered guns. Well, well, Samuel drawled, his cold eyes moving from Vivian to Lucas. The happy couple hard at work, how touching. Lucas moved subtly, positioning himself between Vivian and the door. Thornton, this is school property, you have no business here. Samuel stepped inside, ignoring the warning in Lucas's voice. I'm a taxpayer in this county, Ingram. I have every right to visit our local schoolhouse. His gaze fixed on Vivian's bruised face. Though I must say, our teacher is looking rather worse for wear today. Vivian lifted her chin. Mr. Thornton, I would appreciate it if you would leave. I have work to prepare for Monday's lessons. Samuel's smile didn't reach his eyes. Such dedication, it's admirable, truly. He moved further into the room, his men following. I find myself curious about this sudden marriage of yours. Very convenient timing, wouldn't you say? Lucas's hand drifted toward his holster. Say what you came to say, Thornton. I'm merely expressing my congratulations. Samuel picked up a book from a student's desk, flipping through it idly before setting it down. Though I do wonder if you two were already married. Why was Miss Jensen, excuse me, Mrs. Ingram, living alone above the general store? Most unusual for a married woman. Our arrangements are our business, Lucas replied evenly. Indeed they are. Samuel's smile turned predatory. But you see, I've made some inquiries. Preacher Williams from over in Rock Creek hasn't performed any marriages in the past month. Curious that. Vivian's blood ran cold, but she kept her expression neutral. Lucas didn't flinch. We never said it was Rock Creek. There are other towns, other preachers. Samuel took another step forward. You're lying, Ingram. You stepped in where you had no right, claimed what wasn't yours to take. Vivian is not property to be claimed, Lucas said, his voice dangerously quiet. She's my wife, and you do well to remember that. The standoff stretched between them, tension crackling in the air. Samuel's men shifted restlessly, clearly waiting for a signal from their boss. Your wife, Samuel repeated, the words dripping with contempt. We'll see about that. He turned his attention to Vivian. When you tire of playing house with this saddle tramp, my offer still stands, though the terms may not be quite as generous as before. Mr. Thornton, Vivian said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, I wouldn't marry you if you were the last man in Wyoming territory. Not before Lucas claimed me as his wife, and certainly not now. Fury flashed across Samuel's face, quickly masked by a cold smile. We'll see. He nodded to his men and turned to leave, pausing at the door. Enjoy your happiness while it lasts, both of you. The threat hung in the air even after they departed. Vivian released a shaky breath, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of her desk. Lucas moved to the window, watching as Samuel and his men mounted their horses and rode away. He knows, he said quietly. Yes. Vivian sank into her chair. What do we do now? Lucas turned to face her, his expression grim. We make it real. Vivian stared at him, certain she had misheard. What? The marriage, Lucas clarified. We make it legal. A real ceremony, real documentation that can't be questioned. You can't be serious. Vivian rose from her chair, pacing the small classroom. We barely know each other. Thornton won't stop until he exposes our lie or... Lucas hesitated. Or until he has you. A legal marriage gives you protection under the law that even he can't easily circumvent. So I trade one form of captivity for another. The words came out harsher than she intended. Lucas flinched almost imperceptibly. Is that how you see marriage? As captivity, Vivian sighed, running a hand over her face, wincing when she touched her bruise. No, not inherently, but marriage should be a choice freely made between two people who, she broke off, unable to say the word love in this context. Who care for each other, Lucas finished for her. I understand that. In an ideal world, that's how it would be. He moved closer, his expression earnest. I'm not asking for a real marriage in all senses, Vivian, just a legal one for your protection. We can have it annulled when the danger passes or divorce if necessary. But right now, this is the safest option. Vivian studied his face, searching for any sign of deception or ulterior motive, but found only sincere concern. You would do that. Legally bind yourself to a stranger, knowing it might be months or even years before we could safely end it. I've already publicly claimed you as my wife, Lucas pointed out. In the eyes of this town, we're already married. This just makes it official enough to withstand Thornton's scrutiny. She couldn't deny the logic of his argument. Samuel Thornton had power and influence throughout the territory. If he set out to prove their marriage was a sham, he would eventually succeed unless they took steps to make it legitimate. We would need to travel to the county seat, she said slowly, considering the practical aspects. File the proper documentation, Lucas nodded. We could leave tomorrow. It's a day's journey each way. Vivian took a deep breath, weighing her limited options. Return to her lonely existence, vulnerable to Samuel's increasing aggression. Leave Cottonwood Springs entirely, abandoning her students and admitting defeat. Or marry Lucas Ingram, a man she barely knew but who had already shown her more kindness and respect than most. "If we do this," she said finally, "I need to know more about you. I can't bind myself to a complete stranger even under these circumstances." "That's fair." Lucas leaned against a desk. "What do you want to know? Everything. Where you're from, your family, what brought you west." "The kind of man you truly are." She met his gaze directly. "If I'm to be your wife, even in name only, I need to know the man behind the name." A shadow passed over Lucas's features, but he nodded. "All right, but not here. Let's finish what you need to do and head back to the ranch." "I'll tell you my story there." They completed Vivian's tasks at the schoolhouse in silence, both lost in their own thoughts about the momentous decision before them. As they drove back to the ranch, the weight of their conversation hung between them, making ordinary conversation impossible. It wasn't until they had returned to the cabin, unloaded Vivian's belongings, and settled at the table with cups of coffee that Lucas finally began to speak. "I was born in Pennsylvania," he said, staring into his cup. "My father was a blacksmith, my mother a midwife. I had two brothers, both older." His use of the past tense didn't escape Vivian's notice. "We weren't wealthy, but we got by. I learned reading and figures enough to get along in the world." He paused, took a sip of coffee. "When the war came, my brothers and I all enlisted, Union Army. I was 19. His eyes took on a distant look. "James died at Antietam, Michael at Gettysburg. I made it through somehow, ended up in the cavalry for the last year." "I'm sorry about your brothers," Vivian said softly. Lucas acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. "After the war, there wasn't much to go back to. My father had died while I was away. Heart gave out. My mother followed not long after." His fingers tightened around his cup. "So I came west like so many others, worked cattle drives, ranch jobs, saved every penny until I could buy this place." "And you've been alone all this time?" Vivian couldn't help but ask. A flicker of something pain perhaps crossed his face. "There was someone once, Rebecca. We were to be married when I returned from the war." He set his cup down carefully. "She didn't wait." Vivian's heart ached for him. "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago." Lucas straightened in his chair. "Your turn, fair's fair." Vivian took a deep breath. "I was born in Boston. My father is a professor, my mother a doctor's daughter with literary aspirations. I have one younger sister, Eleanor, who married well and lives precisely the life our parents envisioned for both of us." "But not the life you wanted," Lucas observed. "No." Vivian smiled faintly. "I wanted more than hosting dinner parties and producing heirs. I wanted to make a difference. I became a teacher, much to my mother's dismay. When the opportunity came to teach out west, I took it, despite their objections." "That took courage, or foolishness," Vivian said with a self-deprecating laugh. "I arrived with such idealistic notions about frontier life. The reality has been more complicated." "It usually is." Lucas studied her for a moment. "No suitor back east, no broken hearts left behind." Vivian shook her head. "There were men my parents approved of, but none I could imagine spending my life with. They all expected me to give up teaching once we married." She met his gaze directly. "I wasn't willing to surrender my independence so easily. And yet here you are, considering marriage to a man you've known for a day." "The irony isn't lost on me," Vivian admitted, "but this is different. This is a practical arrangement for mutual benefit, not a surrender of my identity." Lucas nodded slowly. "If we do this, I want to be clear about what it means. Legally, you would be my wife. In practice." He hesitated. "I would never expect or demand anything from you that you weren't willing to give freely. You would continue teaching. Your life would remain your own, except for the protection my name provides." "And what do you get from this arrangement?" Vivian asked, genuinely curious. Lucas seemed taken aback by the question. "I hadn't really considered that. Surely there must be something. No one enters such an arrangement without some benefit to themselves." He thought for a moment. "Company, I suppose, someone to talk to besides Ranger and the horses." A small smile touched his lips. "And I admit there's some satisfaction in thwarting Thornton. The man's had things his way for too long." Vivian couldn't help but smile in return. "That's a cause I can certainly support." Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment, something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or the seed of a connection that might someday grow into something more. Vivian looked away first, suddenly conscious of the intimacy of their conversation. "If we're to be married tomorrow," she said, changing the subject, "there are practical matters to consider, sleeping arrangements, household duties." "Nothing has to change from what I proposed yesterday," Lucas replied. "You take the house, I'll take the barn. As for duties, we each do what we're capable of. I won't expect you to become a ranch wife overnight." "I can cook," Vivian offered. "Not exceptionally well, but adequately, and I can learn other skills with time. And I'll continue handling the ranch work and heavier chores." Lucas stood, carrying their cups to the wash basin. "We'll figure it out as we go along, one day at a time." Vivian nodded, though the enormity of what they were considering still weighed on her. One day at a time. They spent the rest of the day settling Vivian's belongings into the cabin and preparing for their journey to the county seat tomorrow. Lucas showed her around the ranch more thoroughly, introducing her to the horses and explaining the daily routines. By the time evening fell, Vivian felt overwhelmed with new information, but also strangely at peace with her decision. They would marry tomorrow. A marriage of convenience, of necessity, of mutual protection, but a marriage nonetheless. As they sat down to dinner, Vivian found herself studying Lucas more intently than before. This man would be her husband. His name would become hers. Their lives would be intertwined, however practically they approached the arrangement. "Second thoughts?" Lucas asked, noticing her scrutiny. "Not second thoughts exactly, just processing." Vivian toyed with her food. "It's a significant step." "It is," he agreed. "And if you've changed your mind, there's still time to find another solution." Vivian shook her head. "No, I haven't changed my mind. This is the most sensible option given the circumstances." She looked up at him. "But I would like to know one more thing before tomorrow." "What's that?" "Why did you really step in yesterday? The truth. It wasn't just common decency that made you draw your gun and claim me as your wife." Lucas was quiet for so long that Vivian thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "I've watched you since you arrived in town, not in any inappropriate way," he added quickly. "But I noticed you, your kindness to the children, even the difficult ones. The way you stood up to the town council when they tried to cut the school budget." A faint smile touched his lips. "The way you told old Mrs. Harper that women's minds were just as capable as men's when she suggested you shouldn't be teaching the older boys mathematics." Vivian felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. "When I saw Thornton hit you," Lucas continued, his expression darkening, "something in me just snapped. The thought of someone like him breaking your spirit, forcing you into submission." He shook his head. "I couldn't let that happen, not to you." The simple honesty in his words touched something deep within Vivian. "Thank you for telling me the truth. You deserved to know." Lucas met her gaze directly. "Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever comes after, I want honesty between us. That's the only way this arrangement can work." "I agree." Vivian reached across the table, briefly touching his hand. "Honesty, always." The journey to the county seat the next morning began early, with Lucas and Vivian setting out just as dawn was breaking. They had packed enough provisions for 2 days, though Lucas hoped they could complete their business and return in one long day if possible. The territorial road was rough in places, the wagon jolting over ruts and stones. Vivian found herself occasionally pressed against Lucas's side as they navigated particularly difficult stretches. Each time, he would murmur an apology and adjust his position to give her more space. They talked intermittently during the journey, learning more about each other in small, comfortable increments. Lucas told her about his plans for the ranch, how he hoped to expand his cattle herd in the coming years. Vivian shared stories of her students, the challenges and joys of teaching children who might never have another formal education beyond what she provided. By midday, they reached the county seat, a town considerably larger than Cottonwood Springs, with a proper courthouse, several hotels, and businesses lining a wide main street. Lucas guided the wagon to a hitching post outside the courthouse. "Are you ready for this?" he asked quietly as he helped Vivian down from the wagon. She smoothed her dress, the best one she owned, though still modest by any standard. "As ready as I'll ever be." Inside the courthouse, they found the clerk's office and explained their purpose. The clerk, a balding man with spectacles perched on his nose, regarded them with mild curiosity. "Marriage license, is it? Do you have witnesses?" Lucas shook his head. "We were hoping to find some here. Perhaps yourself and another county employee." The clerk considered this, then nodded. "I can serve as one witness, and Judge Patterson is in his chambers today. He can perform the ceremony and serve as your second witness if you'd like." "That would be perfect," Vivian said, relief evident in her voice. They completed the necessary paperwork, Lucas paying the fees with cash from his pocket. The clerk disappeared briefly to speak with the judge, returning with news that he could see them in half an hour. Alone in the waiting area, Vivian's nerves finally caught up with her. "This is really happening," she whispered. Lucas took her hand gently. "It's not too late to change your mind." She looked up at him, studying the face that would soon belong to her husband. There was kindness there and integrity. She could see it in his eyes, feel it in the gentle way he held her hand. "No," she said firmly, "I want to do this." The ceremony itself was brief and businesslike. Judge Patterson, a silver-haired man with a kind face, led them through the simple vows in his chambers. Lucas had purchased a plain gold band in town while the paperwork was being processed for appearances, he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, there was an awkward moment where both Lucas and Vivian seemed uncertain how to proceed. The judge cleared his throat expectantly, and Lucas leaned forward to place a chaste kiss on Vivian's lips, their first physical contact beyond handholding. The touch was brief, but sent an unexpected warmth through Vivian's body. Lucas's eyes, when he pulled back, held a question she wasn't ready to answer. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Ingram," the judge said, signing the marriage certificate with a flourish. "May your union be blessed with happiness and prosperity." They were legally married. Vivian Jensen was now Vivian Ingram, for better or worse. The ride back to Cottonwood Springs was quieter than the journey out, both of them contemplating the significant step they had taken. The gold band felt strange on Vivian's finger, a physical reminder of the commitment they had made, however pragmatic its origins. "We should reach the ranch before dark," Lucas said, breaking a long silence. "Unless you'd prefer to stop overnight somewhere." "No, I'd rather get home." The word slipped out naturally, surprising Vivian. She was already thinking of the ranch as home. Lucas nodded, urging the horses to a slightly faster pace. Home it is then. They arrived at the ranch just as the sun was setting, painting the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Lucas helped Vivian down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary before he stepped back. "I'll see to the horses," he said. "You go on inside." Vivian paused at the door, watching as he led the team toward the barn, her husband. The thought was still so strange, so unexpected. Yet as she entered their cabin, now she felt an odd sense of rightness settling over her. She busied herself preparing a simple meal from the provisions they had packed, finding comfort in the domestic task. When Lucas returned, he hesitated at the threshold, as if seeing her in the kitchen had momentarily disoriented him. "You didn't have to cook," he said, removing his hat. "I wanted to." Vivian stirred the pot of beans she had heating on the stove. It seemed like the wifely thing to do. A small smile crossed Lucas's face. "I suppose it is at that." They ate together at the table, discussing practical matters, how they would announce their marriage to the town, the schedule for the coming week with Vivian's teaching duties and Lucas's ranch work. Neither mentioned the more intimate aspects of their new relationship, skirting carefully around the topic. After dinner, as Lucas washed the dishes despite Vivian's protests, she finally broached the subject they had been avoiding. Lucas, about the sleeping arrangements. He kept his back to her, focused on his task. "Nothing has to change. I meant what I said." "I know you did." Vivian twisted the new ring on her finger. "But people will talk if they learn you're sleeping in the barn. It would make our marriage look suspicious." Lucas's hands stilled in the water. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that perhaps we should share the house at least." Vivian felt her cheeks warm. I'm not proposing we share a bed, but there is a second bedroom, isn't there, behind that other door? Lucas turned to face her, drying his hands on a towel. Yes, there is. It's small, just a cot, really. I use it for storage mostly. Could it be cleared out, made habitable? He studied her for a long moment. You're concerned about appearances. I'm concerned about giving Samuel Thornton any reason to doubt the legitimacy of our marriage, Vivian corrected. If he discovers you're sleeping in the barn while I take your bed, he'll know immediately that our marriage is a sham. Lucas couldn't argue with her logic. I'll clear it out tonight. True to his word, Lucas spent the evening transforming the small second room from storage space to sleeping quarters. It was indeed just large enough for a cot, a small chest, and little else, but it would serve the purpose. As they prepared for their first night as husband and wife, an awkward tension hung in the air. Vivian disappeared into the main bedroom to change into her night clothes, while Lucas waited in the main room, giving her privacy. When she emerged in her modest nightgown and robe, Lucas was sitting by the fire, staring into the flames. He looked up at her approach, and something flickered in his eyes before he quickly averted his gaze. I've left water heating if you want to wash up, she said, hugging her robe more tightly around herself. Thank you. Lucas stood, maintaining a careful distance between them. Good night, then. I'll see you in the morning. Good night. Vivian hesitated, then added softly, husband. The word hung in the air between them, both a barrier and a bridge. Lucas's expression softened. Sleep well, wife, he replied, his voice equally soft. The next few weeks established a routine for the newly married couple. Vivian continued teaching at the schoolhouse, while Lucas tended to the ranch. They rode to town together each morning, Lucas dropping Vivian at the school before conducting his business, then collecting her in the afternoon for the ride home. The town's reaction to their marriage ranged from stunned disbelief to grudging acceptance. The story they told was simple. They had been conducting a private courtship for months, keeping it secret to avoid gossip, and had recently married in a private ceremony. Samuel Thornton remained a looming threat, though he kept his distance. Occasionally, Vivian would spot him watching her from across the street, or one of his men would ride suspiciously close to the schoolhouse during the day. But with Lucas's name and protection, he made no direct approaches. At the ranch, they settled into a comfortable domesticity. Vivian took over most of the cooking and indoor chores, while Lucas handled the ranch work and heavier tasks. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, reading or talking, learning more about each other with each passing day. Vivian discovered that Lucas had a dry wit that emerged when he was relaxed, and a thoughtfulness that manifested in small gestures, a wildflower left on her desk, a new hook installed by the door for her shawl, a stool placed in the kitchen when he noticed she struggled to reach the higher shelves. Lucas found that Vivian was remarkably adaptable, quickly learning the rhythms of ranch life and taking genuine interest in his work. She had a quick mind and strong opinions, challenging him in ways he hadn't expected but came to appreciate. They maintained their separate sleeping arrangements, though the initial awkwardness gradually faded. They grew accustomed to sharing space, to the small intimacies of married life, passing in the narrow hallway, the scent of soap on each other's skin, the sound of breathing from the other room at night. One evening, about a month into their marriage, Lucas returned from town with a newspaper and a troubled expression. Vivian, who had stayed home that day to catch up on grading papers, immediately noticed his mood. "What's wrong?" she asked as he hung his hat on the peg by the door. Lucas handed her the newspaper, folded open to a specific page. Thornton's making moves. The article described how Samuel Thornton had been appointed to the Territorial Education Board, giving him oversight of school funding and teacher appointments throughout the region. "This is about me," Vivian said quietly, setting the paper down. "He's positioning himself to have power over my employment." Lucas nodded grimly. "I suspect so. It's the kind of indirect attack he favors, using his influence rather than confronting us directly." Vivian sank into a chair, her mind racing. "He could have me removed from my position, claim I'm unsuitable as a teacher for any number of fabricated reasons. We won't let that happen." Lucas knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "We'll fight this, Vivian, together." She looked into his earnest blue eyes and felt a surge of emotion unlike anything she'd experienced before. This man who had started as her protector had become so much more a partner, a friend, someone she trusted implicitly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Something shifted in Lucas's gaze, a warmth kindling there that made Vivian's breath catch. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her properly this time, not the chaste peck from their wedding ceremony. She found herself leaning slightly forward, drawn by a force she couldn't name. The moment was broken by Ranger barking outside, alerting them to a visitor. Lucas straightened quickly, moving to the window. "It's a rider," he said, reaching for his gun belt. "Stay inside." Vivian watched anxiously as Lucas stepped onto the porch, hand resting near his holster. She couldn't hear the conversation, but after a few minutes, Lucas returned, a letter in his hand. "It's from the school board," he said, handing it to her. "Apparently there's to be an inspection of the school tomorrow. Thornton will be leading it." Vivian's hands trembled slightly as she opened the letter, confirming what Lucas had said. "This is unprecedented. We've never had a formal inspection before." "It's a power play," Lucas said, his jaw tight with anger. "He's testing his new authority, seeing how far he can push. What do we do?" Vivian looked up at him, fear and determination warring in her expression. Lucas took a deep breath. "We prepare. You're an excellent teacher, Vivian. Your classroom and students will reflect that, and I'll be there too as your husband. I have every right to be present during an official inspection." They spent the evening preparing, Vivian gathering her lesson plans and student records while Lucas cleaned his gun and considered potential scenarios. The tension in the cabin was palpable, but beneath it ran a current of solidarity that strengthened them both. When they retired for the night, Vivian paused at her bedroom door. "Lucas," he turned from his own small room. "Yes, whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that I don't regret our arrangement, not for a moment." Something softened in his expression. "Nor do I, Vivian, not for a moment." The school inspection the next day was tense, but ultimately anticlimactic. Samuel Thornton arrived with 2 other board members, watching with cold eyes as Vivian conducted her lessons. Lucas remained at the back of the classroom, a silent but unmistakable presence. Thornton scrutinized everything: the cleanliness of the room, the organization of materials, the students' work. He questioned Vivian's teaching methods and curriculum choices, clearly searching for any deficiency he could exploit. But Vivian was prepared, answering every query with calm professionalism, her students demonstrating their learning with enthusiasm. When the inspection concluded, Thornton could find no legitimate fault with Vivian's teaching. He left with a thinly veiled warning that the board would be monitoring the situation closely, but it was clear his first attempt to undermine her had failed. "You were magnificent," Lucas told her as they rode home that afternoon. He couldn't find a single thing to criticize. Vivian felt drained but triumphant. "This is only the beginning, though. He won't give up so easily." "No, he won't," Lucas agreed, "but neither will we." Over the next few months, Samuel Thornton's campaign against them continued in small, insidious ways. Supplies ordered for the school were mysteriously delayed. Rumors about the propriety of Vivian and Lucas's hasty marriage circulated through town. One of Lucas's business arrangements with a cattle buyer mysteriously fell through. But for every obstacle Thornton placed in their path, they found a way around it. When school supplies were delayed, Lucas rode to the next town to purchase replacements. When rumors spread, they countered with visible displays of marital harmony in town. When the cattle deal collapsed, Lucas found another buyer further away. Throughout these challenges, their partnership deepened. The pretense of their marriage began to feel less like an act and more like a truth neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Lucas no longer slept in the small second bedroom, but had moved his bedroll to the main room, claiming the cot was too small for his frame. Though Vivian suspected, he wanted to be closer to the door in case of trouble. They still maintained appropriate boundaries, but small touches became more frequent: a hand at the small of her back, fingers brushing when passing items at dinner, an arm around her shoulders when they walked together in town, ostensibly for show, though they continued the practice even when alone. One evening in early autumn, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Vivian finally gave voice to the question that had been growing in her mind. "Lucas, what happens when this is over, when Thornton finally gives up or moves on?" He was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the distant mountains. "I've been thinking about that too." And, Vivian prompted when he didn't continue, Lucas turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "What do you want to happen, Vivian?" The question caught her off guard. She had been so focused on surviving Thornton's machinations that she hadn't allowed herself to consider a future beyond them. "I don't know," she admitted softly. "When we made this arrangement, I thought it would be temporary. A necessity that we would eventually dissolve when it was safe to do so. And now," Lucas's voice was equally soft. Vivian looked down at the wedding band on her finger, then back at the man who had placed it there. "Now I'm not so certain." Something changed in Lucas's eyes, a spark of hope, quickly guarded. "We don't have to decide tonight," he said, rising from his chair. "It's getting cold, we should go inside." But that night, as Vivian lay in bed listening to Lucas moving about in the main room, she knew something had shifted between them. A question had been asked that couldn't be unasked, a possibility acknowledged that couldn't be ignored. The answer would have to wait, but not, she suspected, for very long. Winter came early that year, blanketing the ranch in snow by mid-November. The cold weather brought new challenges, keeping the livestock fed and watered, maintaining the road to town, ensuring the cabins stayed warm enough. It also brought a new intimacy to their domestic arrangement. With darkness falling earlier, they spent more evenings together by the fire. Lucas taught Vivian to play chess while she read aloud from books she borrowed from the small town library. They shared stories from their pasts, dreams for the future, opinions on everything from politics to literature. On the first truly bitter night of the season, with wind howling around the cabin and snow piling against the windows, Vivian emerged from her bedroom to find Lucas adding logs to the fire, his bedroll laid out nearby. "You'll freeze out here," she said, hugging her robe tightly around herself. "The draft from the door is terrible." Lucas straightened, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "I've slept in worse conditions." "That doesn't mean you should now." Vivian hesitated, then spoke the words that had been forming in her mind for weeks. "The bed in my room, your room, really is large enough for two. We could share it just for warmth," she added quickly. Lucas went very still, studying her face in the firelight. "Are you certain?" She nodded, though her heart was racing. "It's practical, nothing more, nothing more." The words hung between them, a shield neither fully believed in but both accepted as necessary for now. "All right," Lucas said finally, "if you're sure." That night they lay side by side in the bed, a careful space maintained between them. Vivian was acutely aware of Lucas's presence, the sound of his breathing, the warmth radiating from his body, the faint scent of soap and leather that clung to him. "Good night, Vivian," he murmured in the darkness. "Good night, Lucas." Neither slept much that first night, both hyperconscious of the other's proximity. But as the bitter weather continued, sharing the bed became part of their routine. The careful space between them gradually narrowed, until one morning Vivian woke to find herself nestled against Lucas's chest, his arm draped protectively over her waist. She froze, uncertain how to react, but Lucas merely opened his eyes, gave her a small smile, and whispered, "Good morning." "Good morning," she whispered back, making no move to pull away. They lay like that for several minutes, neither speaking, before the demands of the day finally forced them to rise. Neither mentioned the shift in their sleeping arrangement. But that night, they settled into bed with less awkwardness, and Vivian deliberately positioned herself closer to Lucas's warmth. Christmas approached, bringing a brief respite from Samuel Thornton's harassment as he traveled east to visit relatives. The school closed for the holiday, giving Vivian more time at the ranch. She threw herself into creating a festive atmosphere, decorating the cabin with pine boughs and ribbons, baking cookies from her mother's recipes. Lucas watched her preparations with amused affection, occasionally helping but mostly content to observe her excitement. "I haven't celebrated Christmas properly since before the war," he admitted one evening as they strung popcorn for the small pine tree he had cut and brought inside. "Then we shall make this one special," Vivian declared. "Every tradition I can remember from home plus any you might recall." On Christmas Eve, they exchanged simple gifts by the fire. Vivian had knitted Lucas a new scarf, the work slightly uneven but made with obvious care. He gave her a small wooden box he had carved himself, decorated with delicate flowers and vines. "It's beautiful," she breathed, running her fingers over the intricate pattern. "I didn't know you could carve like this." Lucas looked almost shy. "My father taught me. I haven't done it in years, but I wanted to make something for you." Vivian opened the box to find a silver locket inside, simple but elegant. "Lucas, open it," he urged softly. Inside was a tiny pressed wildflower the same type as the first one he had left on her desk months ago. Vivian felt tears prick her eyes. "You kept it," she whispered. "I wanted to remember the day you first smiled at me, really smiled, not just being polite." Lucas took the locket from her trembling fingers and gently fastened it around her neck. "It was the day you found that flower on your desk and looked up to catch me watching. You smiled and something in me just came alive again." Vivian's hand went to the locket warm against her skin. "When was that? Before or after our arrangement?" "After," Lucas admitted. "About 2 weeks in, you were grading papers at the table and I left the flower beside your inkwell." "I remember." Vivian's voice was soft with emotion. "I thought it was just a kind gesture. It was more than that." Lucas's hand covered hers where it rested on the locket. "It was the beginning of something I hadn't expected." Their eyes met in the firelight, and Vivian saw in Lucas's gaze everything he hadn't been able to put into words: affection, admiration, desire, and something deeper that made her breath catch. "Lucas," she whispered, leaning toward him unconsciously. He closed the distance between them, his lips meeting hers in a kiss, unlike the brief, formal one they had shared at their wedding. This was tender, questioning at first, then deepening as Vivian responded, her hand coming up to rest against his cheek. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for months," he confessed. "Why didn't you?" Vivian asked, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "Because our arrangement was supposed to be practical. Temporary." His thumb brushed gently over her cheekbone. "I didn't want to complicate things if you still intended to leave when it was safe. And now I don't want you to leave." Lucas's voice was low, vulnerable in a way she had never heard before. Ever. Vivian's heart swelled with emotion. "I don't want to leave either," she whispered. "Not anymore." Their second kiss was deeper, more certain, full of the feelings that had been growing between them for months. When they finally broke apart, both knew that their marriage had irrevocably changed from an arrangement of convenience to something real and precious. That night, they lay in each other's arms, talking softly about the future they now hoped to build together. Not as protector and protected, not as a temporary solution to a dangerous situation, but as true partners in life. "I love you, Vivian," Lucas said as they drifted toward sleep. "I think I have almost from the beginning." Vivian nestled closer against his chest, her heart full. "I love you too, Lucas, my unexpected husband." Spring came early the following year, bringing new growth to the ranch and new challenges from Samuel Thornton, who had returned from his eastern trip with renewed determination to cause trouble. His latest tactic was to petition the school board to relocate Vivian to a different school in the territory, claiming that Cottonwood Springs' enrollment had dropped and no longer warranted a full-time teacher. It was a transparent attempt to separate her from Lucas and the protection their marriage provided. The town rallied around them, parents signing a petition to keep Vivian at the local school, emphasizing the progress their children had made under her tutelage. The school board, despite Thornton's influence, was forced to deny the transfer request in the face of such overwhelming community support. Frustrated by this defeat, Samuel's tactics grew more desperate. Rumors began circulating that Vivian and Lucas's marriage wasn't legal, that they had fabricated their wedding documentation. Anonymous letters to the Territorial Education Board questioned Vivian's moral character. Through it all, Lucas and Vivian stood firm together, their partnership strengthened by the genuine love that had grown between them. What had begun as a practical arrangement had blossomed into a true marriage in every sense. One warm evening in late April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Lucas reached for Vivian's hand. "I've been thinking," he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "We should renew our vows." Vivian looked at him in surprise. "Why, our marriage is legal." "Yes, but it began as a necessity, not a choice." Lucas's eyes were earnest as they met hers. "I want to stand up before God and our friends and choose you properly this time. No deception, no pretense, just us committing to each other because we want to, not because we have to." Tears welled in Vivian's eyes at the simple beauty of his proposal. "I would like that very much." They planned a small ceremony for June, inviting the townspeople who had stood by them through Thornton's harassment. Preacher Williams, the real one this time, agreed to officiate at the small church in Cottonwood Springs. As the date approached, Samuel Thornton made one final, desperate attempt to interfere. 2 weeks before the ceremony, Vivian was summoned to an emergency meeting of the school board, where she found herself facing accusations of improper conduct and misrepresentation of her qualifications. Thornton had obtained letters from Boston clearly manipulated or coerced, suggesting that Vivian had been dismissed from her previous teaching position for unspecified improprieties, rather than leaving voluntarily to come west. Lucas accompanied her to the hearing, his steady presence giving her strength as she refuted the false allegations. She had come prepared, with letters of her own from her former employer and colleagues in Boston, attesting to her exemplary character and professional qualifications. The board, faced with contradictory evidence and aware of Thornton's vendetta, ultimately dismissed the charges, but the experience left Vivian shaken and angry. "This has to end," she told Lucas as they rode home from the hearing. "We can't live the rest of our lives under this shadow." Lucas's expression was grim. "No, we can't." The next morning, he rode into town alone, returning several hours later with a determined set to his jaw. "I spoke with Sheriff Miller," he told Vivian, "and with Judge Peterson. They've been aware of Thornton's harassment for some time but lacked sufficient cause to intervene officially." "And now," Vivian asked, noting the satisfaction in Lucas's eyes, "now they have cause. The forged letters from Boston constitute mail fraud a federal offense. And the sheriff has been building a case about other questionable activities at the Thornton Ranch. They're bringing in a federal marshal next week." Vivian sat down heavily, relief washing over her. "It's really going to end, it really is." Lucas knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "We can have our life now, Vivian, our real life together." The day of their vow renewal dawned clear and beautiful. Vivian wore a new dress of pale blue with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Lucas wore his best suit, his face freshly shaved, his eyes bright with joy as he watched her walk toward him in the small church. Samuel Thornton was conspicuously absent from town, having been taken to the territorial capital to face charges 3 days earlier. His absence felt like the lifting of a dark cloud that had hung over their lives for too long. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, spoken with the depth of feeling that comes from having already weathered storms together. When Preacher Williams pronounced them husband and wife again, Lucas's kiss held none of the hesitation of their first wedding. This was a man claiming the woman he loved with her full and joyful consent. The celebration afterward at the ranch was lively and warm, with townsfolk who had become true friends sharing in their happiness. As the sun began to set, Lucas pulled Vivian away from the festivities for a moment of privacy. "I have something for you," he said, leading her to a quiet spot beneath the old oak tree. From his pocket, he drew a small, worn book. "This was my mother's journal. She gave it to me before she died, but I've never been able to bring myself to read it." He placed it in Vivian's hands. "I'd like you to have it. Maybe someday we can read it together." Vivian understood the significance of the gesture, Lucas sharing a piece of his past, his family, inviting her fully into his life and lineage. "Thank you," she said softly, her fingers tracing the faded leather cover. "I'll treasure it. There's something else." Lucas seemed suddenly nervous, clearing his throat before continuing. "I've been saving money since before we met. Originally, I thought I'd expand the herd, maybe buy more land eventually." "That sounds like a fine plan," Vivian said, curious about his hesitancy. "It was, but now I'm thinking of a different kind of expansion." He took a deep breath. "Vivian, how would you feel about children, our children?" Her heart soared at the question she had been holding in her own heart for weeks. "I would love nothing more," she whispered, tears of joy filling her eyes. "In fact, I've been meaning to tell you." She took his hand and placed it gently against her still flat stomach. "We may be starting sooner than you expected." Lucas's eyes widened in astonishment, then filled with such tender joy that Vivian felt her own heart might burst with happiness. "You're certain?" she nodded, smiling through her tears. "Dr. Morgan confirmed it last week." "I was waiting for the right moment to tell you." Lucas gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I love you, Vivian Ingram," he murmured against her hair. "More than I ever thought possible." "And I love you, Lucas Ingram," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "My protector, my partner, my love." 5 years later, Lucas and Vivian stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching their children play in the yard. Catherine, their eldest at 4, was showing her 2-year-old brother James how to pet the new puppy gently. The Thornton threat was long behind them, Samuel having been convicted and sentenced to prison for his various crimes. The ranch had prospered under their joint care, and Vivian continued teaching, though now only part-time as she divided her attention between her students and her growing family. "Any regrets?" Lucas asked, slipping his arm around her waist as they watched their children's antics. Vivian leaned into his embrace, thinking back to that violent day in the street when a stranger had drawn his gun and claimed her as his wife. How terrified she had been, how uncertain of the future. "Not a single one," she replied, tilting her face up for his kiss. "Every step led us here." "How could I regret that?" Lucas smiled against her lips. "Even Samuel Thornton, even him," Vivian conceded with a laugh, "though I wouldn't wish to repeat the experience." "No," Lucas agreed, his eyes soft with love as he gazed at her. "Once was quite enough." Their lives had found a rhythm neither could have imagined that fateful day, a harmony built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and a love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings. What had started as a desperate act of protection had blossomed into a life richer and more fulfilling than either had dared to dream. As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, Vivian looked up at the man who had become everything to her protector, friend, lover, husband, father of her children. The man who had drawn his gun that day not out of violence but out of a fierce desire to defend what was right. "Thank you," she said simply, the words encompassing all they had been through together. Lucas understood, as he always did. He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Always," he promised, "always."